السماوات ورب الأرض رب العالمين وله الكبرياء في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الحمد لله الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات. ربنا لك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيد الأولين والآخرين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ملك الحق المبين، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله وأمينه على وحيه. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. Dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, all praise and glory and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everything we have, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِّعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Everything that is working in your life, everything that is good, every blessing, it's a blessing and favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that should make you more thankful and more generous. That's the proper response of the believer with the ni'mah, more thankful and more generous. وَإِذْ تَنَبُّكُمْ إِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. The more you are thankful, the more Allah will provide for you and will preserve what you have. And being thankful from the bottom of your heart, but also by sharing. اعملوا آل داود شكرا. Express your gratitude by sharing the bounties and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, our purpose in this life is to meet Allah and find Him pleased with us. That's our ultimate dream. And in this life, related to that, in this life, our dream should be to fulfill the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Infad muradillah. To be, as individuals, the way Allah wants us to be, and as a community, and to do what Allah wants us to do. So this life is a journey of learning and doing. Learning how Allah expects you to be, and try to shape yourself up to fit that, to meet those expectations. And learn what Allah expects you and wants you to do, and do it to the best of your ability. So understanding, learning, understanding, and implementing. Understanding our deen, understanding life, understanding the society in which we are living, because there is no way you can do the job without that understanding. There is no way you can fulfill the mission that Allah has assigned you, mission of tazkiyah and islah, to be the best you can be, the best version of yourself. That requires a lot of learning, and to do and to make this world a better place for everybody. That also requires a lot of learning. We started a few weeks ago a series trying to answer 3 major questions I believe should be the theme, the focus of our thinking, and the focus of our discussion when we get together. One is why our situation does not change, why the attempts to change have failed, even though they were serious and sincere, and how can we change our situation, and how can we fit the description that we see in the Quran. There is a profile in the Quran for the individual believer and for the community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the community of believers to be a leading and a model community. خير أمة أخرجت للناس أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects the community of believers to be leading, to be very impactful, community of difference makers. Those, wherever they settle, they have an impact and they make a difference. And then, after few weeks now, we came to some important conclusion, which is that unless we change our reading of history, we're going nowhere. If we're still going to subscribe to that reading of history that Muslims were in great shape, and Islam was in great shape until the last minute, until the collapse of the Ottoman Khilafah, then no other attempt is going to do the job. Why? Because in our mind, we want to go back to just the minute before, because we were in great shape before the collapse of the Khilafah or the Ottoman state. So in our minds, we just want to close the parenthesis and go back. No, we don't want to go back, because things were not good, were not rosy, as we were told. So we need to change the reading of history and adopt a more objective and more accurate reading. Why? Because then we have a solid foundation we can build on it. Then we can understand what happened and how and why we came to this point, and that's the first step in solving problems. Diagnosis, understanding. So the proper reading of history will lead to the proper diagnosis of the reality, will lead to the proper solutions. Proper reading of history will make you understand now where we are, and therefore the solution will pop up. Anytime you diagnose the problem properly, solution will come up clearly. And in our history, we pointed to something very important. That is, what we were told, it was Khilafah. It was actually a dynasty rule, dictatorial regime, absolute power, totalitarian power, etc. You name it. Very similar to the ones that we see now. It's very unfortunate to say that. It's very unfortunate that it's something that we accepted for a long time, that there used to be an Islamic Khilafah. And then we lost it. No, there wasn't. That system had nothing to do with Islam. There is no element of Islam that you can see in that system. And please read more about that history. You will find things that will shock you. Mass killing, bloody power of struggle, power for struggle for power, very bloody. People beheading easily, torture, you name it. All forms of torture that you see nowadays in the prisons, like we see in Syria recently, etc., they were there before, and even worse. Burning people alive, putting them in a boiling container, cutting their limbs one by one, you name it. Burying people alive, all of this happened. And that does not affect Islam in any way. This is the history of Muslims. That's not history of Islam. That's history of Muslims. A human being, it has some bright spots, but it has also some dark spots. So we're going to have to accept and read more. And the ones I mentioned, they are in Tabari, by the way. They are in very credible books. These forms of torture, they are in very credible sources, books of history. Read about every state when they came, like Abbasid after Umayyads, thousands of killing, and even tens and hundreds of thousands, mass killing, in the worst possible way that you can think of. So all of this happened. So it was not really rousy until the last month. Talking about the Ottoman state, every time a Khalifa takes over, the first thing he does, he kills his brothers. Why? So that they don't struggle for power. Happened once, no, happened many times. It became a usual practice that you need to get rid of the ones who may contest your leadership. So that, when we point to that system of governance, we point to the root cause of our problems today. Now, then we understand why and how we came to this point. Again, that system had nothing to do with Islam, no shura whatsoever, no transparency, no accountability, no leadership by consent. All of these, they were there in Khilafah al-Rashidin. Khulafa al-Rashidin, the principles of Islam were implemented. The Prophet ﷺ implemented them, and then the Khulafa al-Rashidin. But then we relapsed to a system that has nothing to do with Islam. System, it's the same. Everywhere, it was the same system. Absolute power and dictatorship, etc., and corruption. All forms of corruption. Only every now and then we have a decent, like Khalifa, by coincidence. But a lot of them were, again, very brutal and very bloody. So horrible stories and of people leading by fear and by terror, very similar to the ones that we see nowadays. So when you watch about the horror of a regime like the Assad regime, remember that our history was full of that. Our history, the 13th centuries, were full. Only when things settle and people subdue it, then we get some sort of stability. Until there is a weakness in the state, and then we get into a phase of chaos and bloody civil war, and then until another power comes and establish themselves by force. It's like in a form of coup d'etat. It's not, nobody elected anybody, or nobody chose anybody. And that's why, and by the way, these torture that I was talking about, and killing and beheading, you know, they happen for what? They happen for somebody who dared to oppose the regime, or to have a different opinion. That's all. That's all what it takes to find yourself in that situation. All what it takes is to say, I disagree, or I oppose, or why you're doing this. Then you're gone. That's how Muslims, unfortunately, lived for more than 12 centuries. Unfortunately, that power struggle continued until now. If you don't understand why our situation does not change, because we still have that horrible power struggle. Those who are in power, those who are come to power, they want to stay there forever, and they want to dominate. And those who find themselves outside, they want to make everything fail, sabotage. And that we have been in this cycle for so many years now, and so many decades. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this so that we can accept the consequences. That system of governance that lasted for 12 centuries, that has nothing to do with Islam, caused a lot of damage. One, to our understanding of Islam. Two, to the Muslim mind, and to the Muslim psyche and personality and behavior. Any attempt, now you understand why those attempts have failed. Why serious attempts and sincere to change our situation have failed. Why? Because if you don't recognize that damage and you don't fix it, nothing is going to change. If we don't recognize that these centuries caused a lot of damage to our understanding of Islam, to the Muslim mind, to the Muslim personality, etc., if you don't recognize and you don't fix the root causes of the problem, then all attempts fail, and all attempts are bound to fail also. So that explains why things answer the questions that we started with. Why there is no change, why attempts have failed, and that's going to open the door for us now to figure out how we can do it right, and how we can affect the needed change. Now, what are those damages? Because we need to focus on the damage that was caused so that we can fix them. Remember, any attempt to change our situation without fixing the damage, without recognizing the damage and fixing it, is bound to fail. Number one of the biggest damage that happened was frozen minds. That Muslims, they were told to freeze their minds a long time ago. No ijtihad in deen, no free thinking at all. Why? Because that's the nature of dictatorship. You can't have a free mind with dictatorship. With dictatorship, then people have to stop thinking. Stop thinking and stop expressing yourself. Why? So that you can get by. Because if you dare to think and you dare to express your opinion, you find yourself in a terrible, horrible situation. So people learned, with time, to freeze their mind. And then part of the damage is twisted and frozen understanding of Islam. Why twisted and frozen? Why? Because the original Islam, the free minds, the critical minds, they cannot coexist with that type of governance. That system, you can't have people who think freely. You can't have people who think critically. I just told you what happens to them. So everybody can stop doing it. And then you can't have the true version of Islam that enlighten people, encourage contemplation, no, can't. So Islam had to be reduced and twisted so that it can coexist with that system of governance. And then we have that terrible alliance between rulers and scholars, official scholars, because there are scholars who dare to oppose what's going on. This version of Islam that we inherited, that says you need to freeze your mind, there is no need for ijtihad. Why there is no need for ijtihad? We were told because the Salaf, they were much more pious than us, and they were much more knowledgeable. Okay, what's the implication? The implication is you don't need to think, you just have to read their books and memorize them. That's how the majority of us were raised. Majority of us were raised that Islam, it's already developed, we already have the madahab, we already have everything we need, the Salaf did the job for us, so our job is just to embark on reading those books and memorizing them. And later on, even reading the books, we were told that you cannot do it. There should be a sheikh who will read for you. So there should be a sheikh who will open Ibn Kathir or Ibn Qayyim or Ibn Taymiyyah and read it for you, and you just listen. That's freezing minds. That understanding guarantees stagnation. Because when people stop thinking, there is no way they can progress. So stagnation is guaranteed by these two factors. One, minds are frozen. Two, frozen version of Islam. Frozen understanding of Islam. Because Salaf, they developed everything we need. Enough tafsir, enough fiqh. No need to do anything. The only thing we need is to study the books or to memorize. By the way, this understanding is very consistent with this idea of freezing mind and no ijtihad. Was very logical. Why it was very logical? Because if you remove from Islam the sense of mission and the maqasid, and you keep only the sha'air and rituals, they don't need ijtihad. So things were very consistent. You come to Islam, you remove some essential elements from it, and you leave the item that do not require an ijtihad. What ijtihad you're going to make in wudu or ghusl or salah or fasting? There is no more ijtihad needed. So things were really very consistent with one another. There is a totalitarian regime that suppresses thinking and ijtihad, etc., and then caused Islam to be reduced to sha'air and personal fiqh, and because of that it became very logical that there is no more ijtihad, because these things are fixed. These things, they don't change. Whatever is left in Islam does not require much ijtihad. All of this runs against the nature of Islam. I said that system of governance has nothing to do with Islam, and this way of thinking has nothing to do with Islam. This is a religion that encourages free thinking, encourages contemplation, reflection. In the same verse in Quran, Allah praises those who remember Him all the time, and those who reflect and contemplate on the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them ulul albab, الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض. It's an amazing one verse. Allah praises a category of people, call them the wise people, ulul albab, who do what? They remember Allah in all conditions, standing, qiyaman, sitting, and lying down. So, qiyaman qu'udan wa ala junubi. which means all the time. They remember Allah all the time. And they do what? And then they contemplate on the creation of the world. Why things happen, how this universe functions. That's the whole idea of science, by the way. The whole idea of science is to understand how this universe functions. So Allah praises those who do these two things. Remember Him in all the time, and then contemplate and reflect. And somebody comes and says, stop thinking. So runs against the nature of Islam. Runs against the need for ijtihad. This deen survives only with ijtihad. Ijtihad meaning creative, intellectual creativity. Like find the best way to implement, to understand and implement the text. Contextualizing the text. That's what ijtihad is about. What's the best way to understand this verse in the light of context and implement it? So this deen, why requires ijtihad? Because the text is fixed and the context is changing. You can't freeze Islam. Islam has to be always renewed. Always. There are few things that are constant in Islam, but Islam is mostly guidelines. It's not a law. We made it into law, rigid law. But it is meant for people to find the best way to implement it, the best way to understand the verse. So the ijtihad is required. Allah promised us to preserve the text, but assigned us the task to keep it relevant. There is no way you can keep it relevant without ijtihad. No way. If you're going to rely on the work that was done 1,000 years ago in a very different thousands of miles away, then you cannot even integrate, you cannot function. Why? Because you're relying on a work that was done in a very different context. Context has changed, we have to come up with our fresh understanding of Islam. So I'm mentioning the problems and the solution at the same time. And I mentioned last time about critical thinking. And I believe if we understand our religion properly, Muslims should be pioneers in critical thinking. Because Quran is full of critical thinking. We mentioned the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam asking Allah to show him how he brings the dead to life. And Allah was not angry. He just told him, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? Aren't you sure? He said, no, but I just want to be more sure. قال أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي. This is talking to Allah. What's the lesson here? Allah is teaching us indirectly that's the way you should be thinking and behaving. Asking why and asking how, and don't take anything for granted. This is someone talking to Allah. You need better example than this? Asking Allah for something and Allah was not angry. Just told him, aren't you sure? He said, no, I am, but I just want to be more certain. So Allah showed him how he brings the dead to life. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, companions used to ask him. He says something and then the companions say, is this wahi or that's your opinion? And anytime Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, this is my opinion, he said, no, we have different opinion. And he was not angry. These are people talking to the prophets or someone talking to Allah, and these are talking to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The moment they know that's his opinion, say, no, we have a different opinion. Allah, who does not لا يسأل عما يفعل. Allah is not to be asked about what He does. Right? Yet, when He tells us to do something, He explains why. Allah, when He says this is haram, He tells you why. When He asks you to do something, He tells you why you do it. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains? He doesn't need to. Allah explains to train you to ask that question so that you learn to ask why. So because we don't have that opportunity to ask, so Allah explains to us. But His Quran is training us to ask why. That's the only reason the explanation is coming. Explanation is coming to tell you to start thinking critically. to ask why. And if this is with the Quran and with Allah and with the Prophet, how about among ourselves? Or with somebody who's in charge? And Allah had a conversation with Iblis. Why? Why are you refusing to make sujood? Why is this? All of this is to train us to think freely and critically, and not to take anything for granted. Whether it is historical narration, we should scrutinize it, or even fatwa, should ask why. What's your... Imagine if the Muslim population had this kind of thinking. Can you ever imagine they're going to be ruled with this kind of dictatorship? Absolutely not. If we have that free minds and ask them why you do this? In what capacity? So, the moment we understand our religion properly, we'll be, inshallah, pioneers in teaching the world critical thinking in the same way like we should have taught the world about democracy, because we were the first to implement all the elements of democracy. All the elements of democracy were there in the Medina. What is democracy? At the end of the day, leadership by consent. People choose their leader. It was happening in Medina. Shura, consultation. It was happening in Medina. Yes, it was happening in a simple way because it was a small community. They didn't need an election or parliament, etc., because the adhan can be called and everybody can come to the masjid. But if we continued to work on it, we would have turned into a system. Leadership by consent, consultation, or shura, or election. Transparency, very transparent. Every Muslim in Medina knows what's in the treasury. So the Khalifa cannot take any penny and spend it the way they want, because people are aware of what's going on. And they told you about the story of Umar ibn Khattab. Just because he was very tall and he got a piece of cloth that is small, not enough for him. So the next day people saw him with a dress, and then he wanted to speak. He said, no, before you speak, where did you get this from? The clothes that you got yesterday will not be enough. And then he asked his son, Abdullah ibn Umar, and he told him, I gave him mine. So he combined the two. That's transparency at the extreme. You can't even see it nowadays in any democracy, that level of transparency. Accountability, of course. People were accountable. So Muslims learned this idea of citizenship very early on, and the constitution that was written by the Prophet ﷺ. But unfortunately, we relapsed to a system that was common at that time, but we knew better than that. So, why attempts have failed? Because we did not recognize and treat the damage, and because we were doing patchwork. We think that our problem is only dictatorship. So we already topple the regime, and then nothing changes. Why? Because that damage was not fixed. With the same mindset, with the same understanding of Islam, you're going to get the same results. That's why all those attempts failed, because they did not attack the root causes, did not tackle the root causes. A lot more damages happened to our understanding of the deen and to our mind. Inshallah, we'll come back to that and continue, and also in parallel talk about how to fix the mutub al-Allahi innahu ghafurur rahim. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. My dear respected brother and sister in Islam, as you know, in 2 weeks from now, Ramadan is coming, and preparations for Ramadan should start even earlier than now. If you want to take full advantage of it, then you have to start preparing mentally. Prepare yourself mentally that you're going to enter into a whole month of a very strict schedule, and a lot of hard work and a lot of discipline. There is no better opportunity, better opportunity to transform yourself completely better than Ramadan. This is your golden opportunity, and don't miss it, because there is no better opportunity to do that. So let's approach this Ramadan as transformative month of transformation. It's not just worship. Alhamdulillah, everybody is going to worship more, everybody is going to do a lot of good deeds, but we're talking about transformation. So try to point to some good habits that you don't have them and try to acquire them in Ramadan. If you're not someone who has regular sessions with the Quran, try to acquire that habit in Ramadan with the intention to keep it, not to do just Ramadan, because everything is done here. If you approach Ramadan that I'm going to do a better job during the month and then stop afterwards, that's what's going to happen. But if you approach it with the idea that I'm going to acquire some habits and keep them afterwards, that's a very different mindset. So if you are Quran, if you're not in the business of reading, if you're not someone who are always reading books, you finish a book, you start another one. That's the best opportunity to acquire that habit. That's extremely critical habit for Muslims, to be reading and learning all the time. Because that's the only way you can improve, that's the only way you can do the job that Allah has assigned to us. Why Ramadan? It's, again, other good habits, eating habits, sleeping habits, anything good that you want to acquire, that's the opportunity. Anything bad that you want to get rid of it, that's the opportunity. Why this is the case? Because in Ramadan, your iman is the highest level, your motivation is at the highest level, your willpower is at the highest level, even though you might be exhausted physically, but spiritually, your energy is at the highest level. So that's the time. That's the time to transform for such transformations, and I strongly recommend that you start from now planning and preparing and having a schedule and list of habits that you want to acquire and list of habits that you want to get rid of. And the moment you start Ramadan, you'll be fully focused and having clear goals to achieve, because that can make a big difference. Approaching Ramadan with the clear goals, challenging goals, and with the plan and schedule. ربنا اتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم اشف مرضانا وارحم موتانا توفنا وتراض عنا واختم بالصالحات أعمالنا واجعل خير أعمالنا خواتمها وخير أيامنا يوم نلقاك ومتعنا اللهم بالنظر لوجهك الكريم. ربنا ارحم والدينا كما ربنا صغارا وارحم موتانا وجميع موتى المسلمين. اللهم بلغنا رمضان واجعلنا ممن يصومونه ويقومونه إيمانا واحتسابا. اللهم بلغنا رمضان واجعلنا ممن يصومونه ويقومونه إيمانا واحتسابا. اللهم بلغنا رمضان واجعلنا ممن يصومونه ويقومونه إيمانا واحتسابا. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد